The signal came without warning. No countdown, no greeting, no diplomatic preamble. It arrived simultaneously on every frequency humanity had ever used. Audio feeds, encrypted data streams, old pulse light arrays pointed at Luna's surface that nobody had touched in 30 years. Every channel. Every platform, every language. It hit the orbital habitats above Venus first, then Mars, then the ice stations on Ganymede, then Earth. Every screen, every earpiece, every neural interface on every continent 3 minutes and 42 seconds after the initial pulse. The Galaxy Accord had spoken. That was the name they used. The Galaxy Accord, a council of civilizations spread across hundreds of star systems, united under shared law, trade, and mutual protection. Humanity had known about them for decades. We had exchanged cautious signals with their outer representatives a handful of times. Nothing more, until now. The message was long, formal, polished to a mirror shine, wrapped in courteous language that translation AI needed nearly 4 minutes to fully render. But the core of it, the actual meaning beneath all the diplomatic architecture, was simple. Pay tribute or face consequences. They called it a contribution assessment, said it was standard procedure for civilizations that had crossed a certain population and resource threshold. Sciat Earth, with its colonies on Mars and the moons of Jupiter and the floating platforms above Venus, had crossed that threshold 7 years ago, said we owed back payments. The final paragraph said it plainly: civilizations that decline assessment are reclassified as hostile to galactic order, and the Accord reserves the right to restore balance through any means deemed appropriate. That was the threat. Clean. Surgical. Dressed in administrative language, but sharp as a blade at your throat. Commander Dara Voss read it 3 times. She was stationed on Europa at the time, overseeing the deep thermal drill project inside the ice facility the media had nicknamed the Spine. She was not a diplomat. She was a combat engineer who had spent 21 years in interplanetary logistics, including 2 years managing security during the Ceres standoff, when corporate fleets had nearly started a war over drilling rights in the asteroid belt. She had seen power plays before. She knew what one looked like underneath paperwork. They don't want a contribution, she said to no one in particular, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the broadcast screen. They want submission dressed up as accounting. 3 weeks later, she would say it in front of every human leader alive. And she would say it louder. The emergency summit was held inside the Spine itself. Most secure location Earth could arrange on short notice, deep beneath Europa's ice shell, shielded from external signal interference, accessible only through controlled docking corridors that could be sealed in under 40 seconds. Representatives came from everywhere. Earth's national governments, the Martian Colonial Assembly, the Outer Belt Citizen Councils, the Venus Platform Authority, the independent habitat clusters of the Jovian system. Even the reclusive scientific communities buried under the ice of Callisto sent delegates by holographic relay. The room was chaos before anyone sat down. 3 separate confrontations broke out in the outer corridors. A Martian delegate attempted to broadcast a pre-surrender statement and had his transmission blocked by security. A manifesto drone circled the central chamber for 11 minutes, projecting Compli ORDI in 6 languages before a technician finally shot it down with a focused electromagnetic pulse. Nobody had agreed on anything. Nobody was close. Then Dara Voss walked in. No announcement, no introduction. She stepped through the main entrance wearing the dark operational uniform she had been wearing for 3 days straight, a small silver bird pinned to her left collar, the insignia of the Deep Space Engineering Corps. Not a combat rank, not a political badge. Just the quiet mark of someone who built things. She walked toward the center platform. The chaos did not immediately stop. It took about 4 seconds. Then it did. They don't want peace, she said, her voice barely above conversational. They want to own us. And they're being polite about it right now because they think we'll make it easy. The room held its silence. I've been reading the compliance records from every civilization that accepted Accord tribute terms over the last 3 centuries. Every single one. Do you want to know what happened to them? Nobody answered. Their resources got redirected to Accord priorities. Their children got enrolled in alignment education programs on council vessels. Their cultural archives got transferred to Accord-managed facilities, which means alien curators decided what parts of their history were worth keeping. Their political systems got restructured into what the Accord calls efficient governance models, which means whatever made them unique, whatever made them themselves, got quietly dissolved. She stopped at the center platform and looked out at the room. That is not a contribution. That is a slow erasure, and I am not interested in being erased. The silence held a moment longer. Then it broke, but not into chaos, into something different, something focused. Earth's official response went out 6 days later, not delivered by a diplomat, not transmitted on any formal galactic frequency the Accord had provided. It was broadcast on radio, old radio. The same basic electromagnetic wave pattern humanity had been sending into space since the mid-20th century, the first language we ever aimed at the stars when we still hoped something friendly might be listening, unencrypted, no diplomatic codes, no translation protocols. Just a raw signal anyone in the galaxy could read, one sentence. We do not yield. Come and find us if you feel otherwise. The Accord's response came 29 days later in the form of 6 warships entering the outer solar system. Not scouts, not messengers. A demonstration fleet, sent specifically to show an adversary the scale of what they were facing before actual hostilities began, so the adversary could make an informed decision to back down before things became irreversible. Each ship was larger than any station humanity had ever built. The smallest dwarfed the entire Martian orbital platform, their energy signatures registered on civilian telescopes 3 days before they even crossed Neptune's orbit. The largest one, designated Orolith in Accord records, fired a precision shot into Neptune's outer ring as a demonstration of intent, not an attack on any human asset, just a display. A carved signature in the ice and rock of the outer system, saying, "Look at what we can do from this distance, and understand what we are offering you." That was when Project Ember answered. Ember had no official budget line. It existed in no public record, no approved military procurement file, no congressional authorization document. It had been running for 11 years inside a compartmentalized black budget channel, funded through a web of redirected research grants and decommissioned equipment write-offs so tangled that even the people who had approved it in the early stages could no longer fully trace the money. 3 ships had been built under Ember, small by galactic standards, roughly the size of a mid-range cargo hauler, but they were not cargo haulers. They had been designed with one purpose: to destroy something much larger than themselves in the shortest possible time, and then get very far away very fast. They decloaked near the orbit of Uranus. No hail, no warning transmission, no final diplomatic message. They simply attacked. 2 hours and 17 minutes after they appeared on sensors, Orolith ceased to exist, not destroyed in the conventional sense. Its power core was destabilized at a frequency that caused a cascading quantum collapse. The core folded inward, and Orolith folded with it. Gone. Not a debris field. Not wreckage. Just an absence where a warship the size of a city had been 30 seconds before. The remaining 5 Accord ships panicked. One attempted retreat and was disabled before it could achieve departure velocity. The other 4 held position, broadcasting emergency signals back toward Accord space. For 48 hours, every tracked Accord military asset in the known galaxy went completely still. Nobody in human space slept much that night. The feeds ran the sensor recording of Orolith's disappearance on continuous loop. People watched it in silence. Some cried, some cheered, some just sat very still, understanding that something enormous had shifted in what was possible. What do you think really happened in those 48 hours inside the Accord Council chambers? Write it in the comments. I want to know what you think they said to each other. Commander Voss did not celebrate. She was standing in the deep ops center beneath the North Atlantic shelf when the confirmation came through, a retrofitted underwater facility that had originally been built as a climate research station and had been quietly repurposed over the past decade as an off-grid command node. The walls sweated condensation, emergency amber lighting that made everyone look like they were standing inside a photograph from another era. Someone on her staff said, "It worked. One punch worked," she said. "That's not the same thing as a war plan." She was right. The Accord was not going to withdraw. It was not going to recalibrate. It was not going to decide humanity deserved more respectful treatment. It was going to retaliate, and when it did, it would not send 6 ships. 2 days after the Neptune engagement, the Accord's proxies began moving. Dozens of client species, civilizations that had accepted tribute terms decades or centuries ago and had since been integrated into the Accord's enforcement structure. Some had been reshaped so deeply they barely remembered what they had been before. Some had simply been offered enough stability that they had decided cooperation was preferable to resistance. The first proxy strike hit Sarah Station, a mid-belt mining colony of roughly 4,000 residents. The attack was executed by a species called the Vitraxi, insectoid, methodical, efficient. They disabled the station's reactor from orbit and delivered a biochemical payload into the habitat domes. Not lethal to the colonists, but the station became uninhabitable in minutes. 20 years of infrastructure, community, and resource development gone. The second Bauxi strike hit Io Colony. The Arakan, vast artificial intelligences housed in mobile platform bodies, centuries old, appeared in orbit without any approach warning and transmitted one message: either comply or be removed. The colony complied within 2 hours. The Arashan left. The lesson had been delivered to every other colony watching compliance was survivable. Resistance had a cost, or so the Accord believed. What they had failed to account for was something that did not appear in any of their behavioral models, something that didn't map onto the compliance curves built from studying hundreds of other species in similar situations. Humans don't unify easily. Under normal circumstances, they argue constantly, fracture along every available fault line, geographic, ideological, economic, cultural. Get enough of them in a room and they will find something to disagree about within minutes. But push them hard enough in the same direction at the same time, and something different happens. Something old, something that goes much deeper than political alignment or shared ideology. The colonies above Venus began running weapons production around the clock without being asked. The Jovian habitat clusters started drilling their civilian populations in emergency response protocols. On Earth, retired military personnel who hadn't touched their equipment in years pulled it out of storage and showed up at local defense coordination centers. For engineers who normally argued bitterly over resource allocation started sharing everything. The Martian Colonial Assembly, which had not reached a unanimous vote on anything in 11 years, voted 23-0 to place all Marsside assets under Unified Defense Command. Humanity did not organize for war. It became war, quietly, quickly, without fanfare. And in a decommissioned monitoring station at the edge of Pluto's orbital path, 41 people who did not officially exist began preparing for what they all understood would be their final mission. Commander Eli Sark stood in front of them in a room so cold his breath fogged with every word. "The Accord's Second Fleet is assembling along the Scutum corridor," he said, pointing to the projection behind him. Estimated entry velocity into the inner system in 12 days. He turned back to face the room. "We intercept in 9, which means we have 9 days to do as much damage as possible." Nobody asked about the math. They all already understood it. Sark did not recruit soldiers. He recruited problems, people who didn't stop when they were supposed to stop, scientists who built things that weren't sanctioned, pilots who operated in spaces no licensed flight plan had ever included. Former intelligence operatives whose records had been classified so deeply they had essentially ceased to exist as legal persons. He had built them a purpose in the dark. Now he was pointing them at the largest military force humanity had ever faced. Nobody cheered, nobody complained. They nodded, checked their equipment, and got to work. Deep inside an excavated chamber in the Rocky Mountain subterranean network, Commander Voss held her second critical meeting. 10 people in the room. 7 humans, 1 Orinox observer whose species nobody had heard from in 40 years, and Dr. Senamara, who was the reason the meeting had to be held so deep underground with so much electromagnetic shielding around it. Dr. Mara had been officially dead for 9 years. Her death certificate had been filed. Her research had been sealed. Her name removed from every academic database she had ever contributed to. The charges against her, before her alleged death, had included development of unsanctioned temporal manipulation technology, unauthorized testing resulting in the structural failure of a Class C moon in the outer system, and violation of 17 separate interplanetary research ethics protocols. She sat across from Voss now, holding a cup of tea she had made herself from packets she had brought in a coat pocket, looking not remotely apologetic about any of it. "You're not here for my advice," Mara said pleasantly. "You're here for the engine." "I'm here for what gives us a chance," Voss said. Mara tilted her head slightly. Same answer. The Vex 7 engine, the device that had gotten Mara erased from official existence, was not a weapon in any conventional framing. It did not fire anything. It did not detonate. It operated by inducing a localized deformation in the quantum fabric of space-time, creating a region of compressed temporal geometry that caused any matter passing through it to experience severely accelerated entropic decay. The effect was essentially instantaneous from an outside observer's perspective. The moon destroyed in Mara's unauthorized test had not exploded. It had simply aged itself to dust in about 4 seconds. The Accord had banned technology operating on similar principles across 140 star systems. The prohibition was not a suggestion. Mara had been developing a second-generation version for 6 years in a hidden lab beneath the Siberian permafrost. "How many activations before it becomes a hazard to the local stellar neighborhood?" Voss asked. Mara considered this briefly. 3 guaranteed clean activations. After that, we are in experimental territory. The fabric stress accumulates. Think of it like folding a piece of paper. You can fold it a finite number of times before it starts to tear. Define what happens if it tears. Mara looked at her over the rim of the teacup. The kind of bad that gets written into warning inscriptions on asteroids for the benefit of anyone passing through this system in the next 10,000 years. Voss nodded once. "I want it operational in 8 days. Mara smiled. 7. I have been waiting for someone to finally let me use it. The Accord's second fleet came 80 days after Neptune, not 6 ships this time. 80. Flanked by automated drone carriers and surrounded by a gravitational interference grid designed to neutralize any kinetic projectile before terminal approach. They sent no message. The fleet itself was the message. Earth's orbital defense network engaged immediately. The solar ring, a directed energy installation not scheduled for operational testing for another 18 months, was activated cold, without full calibration, and began firing. Some Accord vessels were seriously damaged. Several were not. The drone swarms from the outer system caused chaos in the enemy formation, but not enough chaos to matter strategically. Mars took severe damage in the 3rd hour. The northern hemisphere's communication grid went dark. 3 orbital platforms were destroyed. The Titan station broadcast a distress signal and then went silent. Earth's outer shield layer was failing by hour 5. Then the signal from the moon. The old relay base on the lunar far side, officially decommissioned 14 years earlier and stripped of all listed equipment, suddenly came back online. It broadcast a single encoded sequence, 7 characters, a project designation, Ark 7. Below the Pacific Ocean, in a trench so deep the pressure at the bottom was equivalent to being buried under 4 kilometers of solid rock, something dormant for 9 years began to wake up. It rose slowly. And cameras on the ocean floor tracked its ascent, a shape like a wedge of absolute dark carved from the deep. 1,200 meters long, utterly non-reflective, its surface absorbing every wavelength of electromagnetic radiation rather than scattering it. It breached the surface without a sound and entered the atmosphere without friction, its hull wrapped in a warped spatial field that displaced air rather than pushing through it. It did not have conventional weapons. What it had was a device that could generate a localized inversion of quantum probability within a defined spatial volume. Inside that volume, the probability of any structured matter maintaining its current configuration dropped to effectively 0. The first Accord destroyer that moved to intercept Ark 7 experienced this. It did not explode. It did not break apart. It ceased to be ordered matter. The atoms were all still there. They simply stopped being arranged in the pattern of a destroyer and became, very quickly, And very completely, an expanding cloud of disordered particles, Ark 7 fired again, and again, 7 more times. Then the Accord's second fleet did something no military analyst in human history had ever modeled as a possibility. It retreated. In the Accord Council Chamber, a ring-shaped facility orbiting a gas giant 40 light-years from Earth, delegates argued with each other for the first time in centuries. Not procedural disagreement. Actual fractious argument between representatives who had previously operated in seamless consensus. They destroyed Orolith, now this. These are not primitive organisms behaving unpredictably. These are organisms with hidden capabilities we failed to account for. They are a single civilization in one unremarkable star system. We have 300 contributing worlds. A quieter voice from the far end of the chamber, the Echelon Protocol was never supposed to be used against a species that had not already surrendered. The point of Echelon is coercion, not extermination. The being known only as the voice of order had not spoken yet. It sat completely still at the elevated center position, while the argument swirled below. When it finally spoke, it said only one sentence: humanity has chosen defiance. Let them discover what defiance costs. The word spread through back channels and resistance networks before anyone could stop it. Thalauros? Juno platform. The Callisto deep stations. Human settlements hit by proxy strikes were reporting something unexpected, not more attacks, but contact. Those encrypted communication channels that hadn't existed before, now humming with traffic. Project Ember had a secondary component almost nobody knew about. Voss had authorized it 7 years ago and buried it so completely that even her senior staff believed it was theoretical. It was not theoretical. Embedded deep in the outer colonies, in Accord-controlled systems, in the remnants of species that had accepted tribute decades ago, were sleeper assets, human operatives who had spent years building lives, relationships, and identities in alien cultures. Not gathering intelligence, building trust. Now they were active. The first external rebellion sparked on Thalauros, a swamp world home to the Vari species, amphibious, deeply empathic, capable of sensing the emotional states of nearby beings, under Accord tribute terms for 60 years. Their children taken to alignment facilities, their history managed by non-Vari archivists who decided what was culturally significant. When news of Ark 7 reached their surface through a smuggled broadcast, the Vari did not wait for permission. They did not have weapons. They had tools. And 60 years of accumulated understanding of exactly how the Accord's administrative infrastructure on their world worked, where the vulnerable points were, which automated systems had blind spots, which overseers were motivated by fear rather than belief. Within 3 days, the Accord's administrative presence on Thalauros had collapsed. The Vari sent a signal to every relay point they could access. Not sophisticated, not diplomatic. 4 words in broken standard Accord language, broadcast on the same frequency Earth had used for its original refusal. We also say no. The message traveled faster than the Accord could block it. By the time human agents arrived at Thalauros, the rebellion was already spreading to 3 neighboring systems. In the council chamber, the voice of order reviewed the intelligence reports in silence for a long time. Then it authorized deployment of the Echelon asset. Echelon was not in any file that circulated among the Accord's general membership. Its existence was known to 7 beings in the entire galaxy, and 5 of those 7 had believed until this moment that it would never actually be used. It was ancient. Older than most of the Accord's current member species, built in an era so distant that the civilizations who constructed it had long since transformed into something unrecognizable or ceased to exist entirely. Echelon could bend time, not travel through it, not observe it, bend it. Or apply graduated temporal distortion to a target volume of space, causing the sequence of cause and effect to lose its structure. A civilization subjected to Echelon didn't get destroyed. It got unmade. Its history dissolved from under it. The species still existed. The atoms still existed. But the coherent narrative of what they had done and become gone. It had been used once before. The record of that use had been erased. What remained was a single inscription on a dead rock in a system no one visited. When Echelon moves, stars forget. Voss received the intelligence report 14 hours after the voice of order gave the order. It arrived as a corrupted audio file that took her team 6 hours to reconstruct. She listened to it 3 times. Then she walked to where St. Amara was running calibrations on the VEX 7 engine's secondary array. "I need you to tell me something honestly," Voss said. Mara looked up. "When have I ever not been honest? Can we stop something that rewrites history?" Mara was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. Then she said, "That depends entirely on what you're willing to give up to do it." The mirror engine was Mara's answer to Echelon. Not a counter to it, not a shield. A reflection. The principle was simple in the way that the most dangerous ideas always managed to be simple if Echelon worked by projecting temporal distortion outward at a target. Then a device that intercepted that projection and reversed its vector would not stop Echelon. It would return Echelon's effect to its source. Whatever Echelon did to its target, the mirror engine would ensure that Echelon experienced instead. "The Council has spent centuries using this thing to erase civilizations they wanted to forget," Mara said, sketching calculations on a physical notepad because she didn't trust any network device with this information.
"Every decision, every campaign, every culture they dissolved."
And Echelon recorded all of it. The machine has to function. It needs a reference point for what it's unmolding. 300 years of decisions are still in there. She looked up. "If we reflect the pulse back, the Council doesn't lose their weapon. They gain their memories, all of them. Every decision they made for 300 years returned to them at full resolution all at once." "Will it stop them?" Voss asked. "I have absolutely no idea," Mara said cheerfully. "But it will certainly give them something to think about." There was one problem. The mirror engine needed a delivery point inside Echelon's operational field, which meant someone had to take it there, and Echelon was already moving. Estimated arrival at the outer edge of Sol System 11 days. Voss contacted Commander Eli Sark directly, no intermediaries. An old private channel they had used during the series standoff, a frequency that existed in no database. "I need you to fly into the middle of Echelon," she said. The pause on the other end lasted almost 10 seconds. "Define the middle," Sark said. "The temporal distortion field. The active operational core. The part where time stops working like time. What am I delivering? A mirror? And after delivery, Mara says there's a 6% survivability window. Mara's saying that as a compliment," Sark said. "She means 0. She means 0, a moment." "How many do I need?" 20 minimum. More if you can get volunteers. "They'll all volunteer," he said. "These people stopped treating survival as a variable a long time ago." "Sark," Voss paused. "I'm sorry this is the ask." "Don't be," he said. "We've been aimed at something like this since the beginning. I'm glad it's something that matters." He cut the channel. She stared at the dark screen for a long time. The ship they gave Sark was called the Meridian Dark. It was not beautiful. Built and rebuilt and patched together over 15 years of black budget operations, its original frame buried under layers of added systems, redundant power relays, and armor panels from 3 different decommissioned vessels. Its hull was a record of every conflict its crew had survived. There were dents that had never been smoothed out because smoothing them out meant taking the ship offline, and nobody had ever wanted to stop long enough. 26 people boarded it. Sark stood at the entrance to the main corridor and looked at each of them as they passed. They looked back at him. That was the whole ceremony. The Meridian Dark launched from its hidden dock on the dark side of Callisto with no formal departure clearance and transited the outer system at maximum sustainable velocity, tracking Echelon's approach through passive sensors that gave only partial data because Echelon's own mass was warping the readings around it. Echelon was not approaching in a straight line. It moved in a curve. Mara had described as gravitationally predatory, feeding on mass as it moved, absorbing the gravitational potential of objects it passed near to maintain its own velocity. The outer solar system was noticeably different in its wake. Kuiper belt objects had shifted. Trans-Neptunian bodies had moved from their established orbits. The machine was eating the physics of the approach corridor. 3 days into transit, the Meridian Dark crossed into the region of space where Echelon's temporal distortion field had begun to extend, subtle at first. Instrument readings slightly inconsistent with each other. Crew members occasionally speaking before the events they were responding to had quite happened. A déjà vu that was not psychological but physically real, moments that genuinely repeated themselves before snapping back to sequence. Then less subtle. Sark blinked and saw his own hands in 2 slightly different positions simultaneously. The ship's chronometer displayed 3 different readings at once. One crew member stopped in the middle of a sentence, stood completely still for 40 seconds, and then continued from where he had left off as though nothing had happened. He could not recall the 40 seconds. They simply were not there. 40% into the field, the pilot reported. "Keep going," Sark said. The mirror engine was housed in the Meridian Dark's cargo section. Mara had spent 3 days integrating it with the ship's power systems. She had finished the integration with 6 hours to spare, then sat on the floor of the cargo section with her back against the engine casing, and her eyes closed. Sark had found her there and asked if she was sleeping. "Listening," she said, without opening her eyes. "It hums." At a frequency that corresponds to the resonant period of...
She paused.
"You don't want the full explanation?"
Probably not.
"It's ready," she said.
When you reach the core field boundary, I can activate it remotely from Earth, but someone needs to confirm proximity.
The activation signal needs a timestamp from inside the distortion gradient to calibrate the reflection vector. "I'll confirm it," Sark said. She opened her eyes then, looked at him directly. "It's been an honor." He nodded. Likewise. On Earth, Voss stood in central operations watching the screens show Echelon's position in real time, a slow-moving shape of nightmare surrounded by a gravitational distortion field that appeared on sensors as a shimmering absence, a zone where normal physics hesitated. It had reached Saturn's orbit. Earth had 12 hours. The outer defense grid was still functioning. The solar ring had been repaired to operate at 40% capacity. Ark 7 was positioned in the inner system, waiting. The Allied Varian Orinox ships, 61 vessels, small but fast, were distributed across the inner system in a dispersal pattern designed to survive the opening salvo of any conventional attack. But none of it would matter if Echelon reached operational range, none of it. "Meridian Dark is at 70% field depth," a technician reported. Voss nodded. She did not look away from the main screen. "Sark," she said quietly, to no one in the room. Be the impossible thing? At 0417 Universal Time, the Meridian Dark crossed into the core boundary. At 0419, Sark activated the proximity confirmation signal. At 0421, Mara triggered the mirror engine from the operations center 1500 light seconds away using a quantum entangled activation signal that did not require conventional transmission time. No light show, no explosion, no dramatic pulse radiating outward. What happened was quieter and more absolute. The mirror engine generated a reflective temporal field that intercepted Echelon's outward distortion projection and folded it back along its own vector. The fold was perfect. Mara had spent 6 years making sure it would be. Echelon's temporal field hit its own source, and the machine, for the first time in its ancient existence, experienced what it had done to others. 300 years of Accord history compressed. Every moment of every decision that had led to this point returned to the consciousness at the core of the machine in full and unmediated detail. Every civilization absorbed, every culture dissolved, every history unmade, every child taken from a parent for alignment education. Every world that had knelt because the alternative was Echelon, all of it, back. The Accord Council chamber went dark in less than 4 seconds. Every active Accord military asset in the Sol system stopped transmitting. Echelon did not explode. It did not break apart. Its enormous mass simply stopped moving, dead in space, like something that had been walking and forgotten how. The gravitational distortion field collapsed, and the Meridian Dark was gone. On Earth, the screens in the operations center showed static where Echelon's signature had been. Then slowly stars. Just the normal stars of the outer solar system, undistorted, in their correct positions. "The core has collapsed," a technician said, barely audible. "Echelon is inert. No signal, no field, nothing." Nobody cheered. The room was very quiet. Commander Voss looked at the screen for a long time. Then she said quietly, "All units, stand down from active engagement posture. Begin damage assessment. Begin rescue operations for all disabled facilities." She paused. "Mark the Meridian Dark and all crew as mission complete, not lost." Complete. She turned away from the screen, walked to the back of the room, stood at a small observation window that looked out on nothing but bedrock. Mara did not move. She sat in her chair with cold tea and did not speak for a very long time. Outside, in the solar system, the debris of 3 months of war drifted in silence. Damaged stations, disabled ships, the gravitational scars left by Echelon's passage, the missing orbits of objects that would need years to restabilize. And around it all, something that had not been present in this system for as long as anyone could measure: quiet. The council chamber of the Accord remained dark for 9 days. When transmissions began again from Accord space, they were not orders, not threats, not demands for compliance or declarations of intent. They were questions, fragmentary, hesitant, transmitted through back channels rather than official Accord frequencies, questions from individual council members to each other, questions that said, in different languages but with the same underlying disorientation, what happened to us. What the mirror engine had done was not destroy the council. It had not removed anyone from power or dismantled any structure. It had simply returned to the council's collective consciousness the full weight of its own history. 300 years of decisions made efficiently, bureaucratically, at the remove of administrative abstraction, now experienced not as policy but as event, not as records but as memory. Some council members submitted resignations within the first 48 hours. The Accord's enforcement fleet in the Kepler sector, 47 ships that had been moving toward Earth as a contingency deployment, stopped in place, held position for 6 hours, and turned back. Not because anyone ordered them to, because the admirals commanding them received the mirror engine's reflection as a data packet and spent 3 hours in silence reading the record of what they had been part of. On Thala-Oros, the Vari were telling their children a story about a human ship that flew into a machine the size of a moon and did not come back. Some details had changed in transmission, but the core of it was accurate. Someone had done the impossible thing, and the impossible thing had worked. On Earth, reconstruction began. Slower than anyone wanted, faster than they had a right to expect. Sarah Station was being rebuilt from scratch, its 4,000 residents living in temporary habitats while the permanent structure went back up around them. The Martian Northern Hemisphere's communication grid took 8 months to restore. The orbital platforms above Earth, 7 of the original 11 destroyed or critically damaged, were being replaced by a new design. The solar ring was completed, properly this time, with full calibration cycles and adequate testing protocols and a commissioning ceremony that most of Earth's surface watched on broadcast feeds. Every person who had worked on it was acknowledged by name. There were hundreds of them. The Orinocs, who had appeared above Mars during the war, were now a permanent presence in the solar system. Their spiral shell ships docked at a purpose-built habitat above Titan. They were strange and quiet, and occasionally difficult to understand, but they stayed. The Vari sent a delegation to Earth 4 months after the war ended. The lead delegate, tall, pale green, speaking in carefully practiced English, stood at the edge of the landing platform in New Nairobi before a crowd of several 100,000 people and said, "You did not ask us to follow. You only showed us it was possible to stand. We will not forget this." Across Accord space, the remnants of authority were fracturing along a dozen different fault lines. Some former council members attempted to establish a reformed organization. Some retreated into private life. And some, the faction that worried Voss most, had gone quiet in a specific way. Not the quiet of retreat, the quiet of reorganization. The voice of order had not been heard from since Echelon's collapse. Its home system transmitted normally. But the voice itself, nothing. No official communications, no back-channel signals. Voss assumed it was waiting. What do you think the voice of order is planning in that silence? Drop it in the comments, because what happens next depends on exactly that kind of decision. The Union of Free Worlds was not Voss's idea. The proposal came from the Ornoks, specifically from their eldest philosopher, a being whose age was estimated in centuries, who communicated through harmonic tones and light patterns. The proposal was simple: no tribute, no forced membership, no central enforcement authority. A shared charter with 3 core principles: no world governed without its own consent, no species silenced by another, no tribute demanded of any civilization under any framing. Signatories would share technologies and resources voluntarily, provide mutual defense support when requested, and maintain communication channels and diplomatic frameworks. That was all. The minimum viable definition of not being alone. The signing happened aboard a station the Ornoks had built specifically for the occasion, positioned at the gravitational midpoint between the inner solar system and the first Ornoks habitat above Titan. Neutral space, nobody's home, everybody's meeting point. 15 species sent representative. Some had been at war with each other within living memory. Some had never spoken directly to each other before. Some communicated through methods that required 20 minutes of preparation per exchange. They all signed. Voss signed for Earth. She did it last, deliberately. Waited until every other representative had completed their signature. When a diplomat asked her why, she said because it was never supposed to be about us. We were just the match. The diplomat looked confused. Other people had been holding the fuel for a very long time, she said. They just needed someone to light it first. But not everyone believed in the Union. On Zarna 5, a warlord named Veliketh declared Earth a false prophet, calling the Union a second empire wearing a smiling mask. His followers broadcast daily accusations that humanity had merely replaced the Council's domination with softer chains. On Kiris Minor, a bomb exploded in a refugee clinic, killing 12 humans, 6 Veri, and a Merc medic. The group behind it believed humanity should remain isolated, unentangled from alien species and galactic responsibility, and in the deep shadow bands beyond the Thranak system, Council loyalists had begun whispering the old creeds again. The Council might have died. Its rot still lingered. Then the signal came, the one that had first been thought a myth. The echo of Commander Arakel, who had flown the delivery ship into Echelon's core and had not come back. Her voice came through unfiltered, longer this time, clearer. If you're hearing this, I'm alive. Not in the way you remember, not flesh. I don't belong to time anymore. I belong to the wound. Echelon didn't end. It opened. And inside it I found others, not just Sark, but the forgotten, the erased. All the ones the Council buried in silence. They're still there, they remember. And they're waiting, static. Then a final line. The war is not over, it just moves somewhere we can't follow yet, but someday we will. The message caused a firestorm. Some took it as prophecy, some as threat. Others insisted it was a hoax, but Voss knew Era's voice. She had heard it across 30 command briefings, 6 combat operations, and 1 argument about resource allocation that had lasted 4 hours and ended in mutual respect. That was Ara. Not a ghost. Not a trick. Ara from somewhere inside the fold. A summit was called. It's held on Eli Station, a massive Ornox-built habitat floating between systems, neutral ground, nobody's home, everybody's meeting point. 15 species sent representatives, Veri chieftains, Ornox philosophers, Garoon engineers, human delegates. Even the Merc, who communicated through scent and light. The largest interspecies assembly in galactic history. Voss did not want to speak. She never wanted to speak again. But someone else would if she didn't, and they might speak in chains. So she stood before the largest audience the galaxy had ever seen. No medals, no formal uniform, only the broken earth patch from the war stitched onto her chest like a reminder of the cost. This isn't about power, she said. This isn't about glory. This is about the bruises the galaxy still carries. We survived the Council, we tore out the cancer. But healing takes more than cutting. She looked out at the room. The Union must not become what we hated. No flags, no forced unity. Let this be a place where disagreement is sacred, where diversity is not a threat, where no one ever kneels again unless by choice. If you want me to lead, I will. But I will not rule. I will not become the next god of the stars. I am not the voice of humanity. I am only a human voice." When she finished, there was no applause, just silence. Then one voice, a murk tone of glowing purple from the Orinox Elder. The translator rendered it aloud. "We accept the voice. We do not follow it. We walk beside it." And that became the new code. No leaders, no rulers, no gods, just voices walking side by side, different, flawed, free. In the years that followed, the galaxy reshaped itself. Some worlds joined the Union. Some remained independent. Others chose isolation. Their doors closed, their skies peaceful. Earth became less a planet, more a bridge, a place where ideas met, where survivors found new names for themselves. Children on distant worlds studied human history not to fear it, but to understand what made them refuse. The tribute chains became museum relics. The words "we will not yield" were etched in stone on planets that had never seen Earth but had felt what it meant. Mara eventually left. No goodbye. Last known location somewhere beyond the Cygnes relay, past the edge of mapped territory. Some said she went to find the source of Ara's final signal. Others said she became it. As for Voss, she stepped down 12 years after the war ended, returned to New Greenland, lived quietly, died quietly, surrounded by books and trees and weather that belonged to no war. On her memorial, no titles, just one sentence: she didn't kneel. 3 years after the conflict ended, a signal came through on the private channel only 2 people had ever known, Voss and Sark, a frequency that existed in no database. It transmitted for 42 seconds, then stopped. Mara spent 4 days decoding it. She came to Voss and sat down and was quiet for a moment. Unusual for Mara. "He's not dead," she said. Voss looked at her. "What does that mean?" "It means Sark exists inside the temporal fold where Echelon collapsed. Not in conventional space, not in conventional time." She paused. "But he's there." "What does the signal say?" Mara looked at the table. "It says the fold is a door. We opened the wrong side. Give us more time." Voss was quiet. "Us," she said. Mara nodded. "He's not alone in there." At the same time, something else was growing in the edges of former Accord space. They called it the Old Voice. No leader, no flag, just an idea. A shared longing for the structure that Council dominance had once provided. Not everyone involved was a former loyalist. Some were simply civilizations that had found self-governance harder than expected, who missed being told what to do even if what they were told was cruel. A figure began appearing in Old Voice broadcasts, tall, still, face obscured, voice processed, speaking in the precise, unhurried cadence of someone who had once been very powerful and intended to be again. Voss's analysts could not identify the figure, but every assessment included the same footnote speech patterns consistent with the voice of order. She read each footnote once. She did not request a 4th assessment. One morning she stopped on a bridge over a restored waterway in New Eden. A very child passed with a parent, clearly on the way to school. The child looked at her. "Are you the one who said we just decided not to kneel?" "Where did you hear that?" "It's on our school wall, in Very and in English." "Then yes," Voss said. The child thought about it. "Are we going to have to do it again?" Voss looked at her. "Probably." "Things worth keeping usually need defending more than once." The child nodded and walked on. Voss stood on the bridge a moment longer. Then she opened a channel to Mara, who was somewhere past the Kuiper belt, working on what she called the obvious implications of the mirror engine's theoretical framework, which Voss understood meant she was trying to build a door into folded spacetime. "How close are you?" Voss asked. 6 months, maybe less. I need 4 people with security clearances that no longer exist. I can find 4 people. I know. Mara's voice was steady. He's in there. He's alive. And the Old Voice is building something. Sark can see the temporal distortion from inside the fold. Whatever it is, it looks like Echelon's framework. Not the machine, the principle. Voss was quiet. "So we need to move," she said. "Yes," Mara said. "We do." She closed the channel, kept looking at the water. The galaxy had turned. Not all the way. not to any final point. Just turned. The way things turn when the force holding them fixed gets removed, slowly, imperfectly, still settling. The old voice was out there, rebuilding in the patient way that old power always rebuilds. In the edges, in the dark, speaking to people who were tired or afraid or who had decided that freedom was harder than they expected. Sark was in the fold, counting days, sending signals through a door that did not exist yet. And Mara was building the door. The city woke up around Voss. Above, in the pale blue of the morning sky, a transit shuttle arced toward the orbital station, carrying people to work, to family, to lives that would not have been possible 5 years before. The stars were there, behind the blue. They were always there. She kept walking. This was not the end. It was where the story got harder and more worth telling. And if there was anything humanity had proven, it was that harder and more worth telling was exactly where they did their best work. In the dark, under pressure. When the cost was real, and the outcome uncertain, and the only thing they knew for sure was that kneeling was not an option. That was the inheritance. What Sark bought with his disappearance. What Mara bought with 12 years of official death. What 26 people on a ship called the Meridian Dark bought with everything they had. A galaxy still turning. A door almost finished. A story that was never going to be over. What do you think is really happening inside that fold right now, and what does the old voice build next? Write it in the comments. This universe is bigger than one story, and you decide where it goes.